you consider yourself a gamer, and what does that mean to you?
Primarily a tabletop gamer, but I do spend a lot of time playing computer games. Not so much the online side. I don't like playing with assholes. I tend to keep to myself for the most part. It's more of a solitary gamer. But yeah, I mean, I was describing myself as a gamer when it was just tabletop games. We were all describing ourselves as gamers. Was a little bit resentful when computer games kind of took over the name. But yeah, I've always been steeped in games. I think a lot about games. I create games, mostly tabletop, but I have consulted or done bits of work on computer games. Sadly, most of those haven't ended up being published. But so yeah, what does it mean to me? Art, imagination, escape. It's the quintessential modern art form, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's also, I too consider games to be art, and that's why I was so opposed to the censorship of them and this moral panic that you talk about. And it's a little bit odd because as we consider games art, so do some of the people on the other side, the more anti-Gamergate side or social justice warrior side or whatever kind of language you want to use. But if you listen to the way they talk about it, like video games are art, therefore we have to develop more advanced critiques of them than just product reviews of is this a good game or not. That was an argument you would see some people make on the anti-Gamergate side.
Yeah, I don't think that's a coherent argument because real art, high art, is protected culturally from censorship and from criticism. What it's not protected from is analysis, most of which is complete bollocks. I did study art for a while. My art tutor always used to say, art is 10% talent and 90% bullshitting. And I think he was right. It's mostly about marketing. It's the name and the mystique that you can put around high art. Games are what people might look down on snootily and describe as low art. When I say something is art, I also regard commercial art as art, advertising, cereal boxes. I think it's all important in its way. But I do think they're being inconsistent. If they want to admit and accept that games are art, then they have to back off from trying to control and censor artists. And they need to limit themselves to analysis rather than trying to get art banned. I remember going to see some statues in one of the London museums. I was quite young, it's a bit hazy. But I remember one of the party going round was this American tourist woman, and she was scandalized by the fact that the statues were naked. She'd willingly gone to this exhibition to go and see these particular sculptures that weren't dressed, and then was scandalized that they were naked and wanted them to be covered up. And that is what they sound like to me. You want to say it's art, but you don't want to interact with it on the same terms that you interact with art. And that seems dishonest to me.
Do you think the term gamer is gendered? Or is it to you, I guess, at least?
I don't think it's necessarily gendered, but for whatever reason you want to pin it on, games of most descriptions are still primarily a male audience. So I think there's an implicit gendering to it rather than an explicit gendering to it. I think that has changed a lot in that gaming has become more acceptable, but I would be very surprised if it ever became 50-50. Genetics aren't destiny, but I do think there are some fairly fundamental differences hormonally and otherwise between the sexes. Different but equal, I would say. But for whatever reason, whether it be cultural or otherwise, there does seem to be a split in interest.
I should probably save you for a second. Different. You're British.
Yes.
Different but equal has a very different connotation in the United States, because that was a
I
that was a
deliberately didn't say separate but equal.
Okay,
I
cool.
was deliberately not saying that.
Okay, cool.
Well, like, okay, so say I'm stood next to another guy and he's taller than me, right? So he can reach the top shelf. He'd probably do better at basketball, whatever else. He's different to me, but we're of equal value as human beings.
So do you think that the reason we don't see, exact 50-50 for people who play Halo, for instance, is probably because like women are more interested on average in games that aren't as violent as Halo?
I think there tends to be more obsessive interest in escapism amongst men, particularly sort of public displays of escapism. I think that's why erotica is more popular amongst women than it is men, because it's easier to hide. You can slip your book inside something else, or people won't necessarily know what you're reading. I think there's a degree of shame that I would say is genuinely sexist. That's maybe part of it. I don't really know why the difference is there, but I do think I do acknowledge that there is a difference for whatever reason. I'm just not entirely convinced that it's just nature or just nurture.
Now you actually wrote a book, I believe. I've not read it, about diversity in games too, right? In tabletop.
In tabletop games, yeah. With a few other people who wanted to stay anonymous. So as a sufferer of depression and a few other issues as well, I felt talked down to, patronized, ignored by the very people who were constantly talking about diversity and inclusion, because they seem to want to put people in their media who are disabled or whatever else, but then they don't want that disability to impact the character in any way. I don't particularly want to play someone with the same limitations as me. I mean, that's the point of escapism to me, is to be something different. But I set out to write that book as a way of genuinely representing people with their differences and limitations within games in a more realistic isn't quite the right word, plausible sort of way, and a way that didn't just brush off whatever their problems were and leave them at a surface level. So that was kind of a cathartic enterprise for me because I was so fed up of being talked down to and ignored.
When you say talked down to and ignored, do you who was doing this specifically? Do you know? Or not person, but like what kind of setting was it in?
So kind of similar to the problems we had around Gamergate and computer games, with people constantly arguing for diversity and inclusion, but always making it very surface level and ignoring viewpoint diversity. As a mental health sufferer, I constantly found myself being talked over by people who thought they were doing good but wouldn't listen. I guess I'm the wrong kind of the wrong kind of mental. I don't know. And these are the very same people saying how important it is to elevate these voices and so on, and unless you disagree with them. Being a minority of a minority doesn't seem to be a very nice position to be in.
So you're big in the roleplay world. You make role-playing games. And part of
I used to be bigger. Gamergate kind of torpedoed my career for a while.
Hey, you got a Wikipedia article, you made it.
Yeah, but they won't update it. It's so out of date.
Part of the role-playing experience is being in someone else's shoes, taking on their experiences, their personality, their motives and objectives and agendas, and making those your own for a time in this sort
Mm-hmm.
of pretend way, living someone else's experiences, fictional character, generally.
Yeah,
This,
I go on.
I was just gonna say this. This is obviously a very different way of being. I guess video games kind of have the same kind of character too, because in many cases you are playing this fictional character, operating in this fictional world with sometimes other players, but sometimes also like NPCs, depending on the game, and you have to play this other role, and that's something very unique about the artistic form of tabletop or the artistic form of video games that we don't see in other medium. This interactive element and this role playing element.
Yeah, the interactive element certainly. When it comes to video games, they can't yet do what a tabletop games master can do, and you can't get as immersed into your role because you're always limited to the choices that are programmed into the computer. So you can't roleplay exactly how you want to. So I think with some video games, the older Fallouts, perhaps, they kept things as broad as possible, and that's probably the closest you can get to the tabletop experience on the computer. But I remember during Gamergate, a study came out that said that people don't identify with their avatars. They don't inhabit their avatars. It's more like you're controlling a chess piece or whatever, and maybe passively enjoying the cutscenes or whatever. But people weren't identifying with their characters, and it wasn't something that most gamers regarded as important, which I thought was very interesting, given how important we were being told that representation and so on was in computer games, and here was direct evidence to the contrary. But yeah, in tabletop games, for me, the thrill is often playing someone very different to myself. The bisexual magician from the 19th century, or an evil necromancer warlord. Someone whose ideology and thoughts and reactions are completely different to my own. But I find it interesting that you bring that up, because that's desperately unfashionable in the role playing scene at the moment. People seem really fixated upon self inserts and a direct one-for-one representation of their idealized self in the games. And to me, that goes against the whole spirit. And one of the great things about tabletop games is it can teach you sort of radical empathy and compassion because you exercise that muscle of getting into different points of view.
And you mentioned that there was a study that found that gamers don't really care about that. That's probably true for like the vast majority of them. But I think there are probably a very small minority, but a minority of people who do, I think, really take role playing seriously. Like with for instance, like I got involved for a while with the Final Fantasy XIV role playing community, the MMO,
Mm-hmm.
and these people, myself included, for a time would like take the characters like alignment and values. People would create entire websites dedicated to their character, right? It was like a real thing. People would really create. I
Mm.
wasn't that dedicated, but people would make entire websites about their character and like their character's backstory and lore and like how would their character respond in this situation and like use that to interact with other people. Now, this probably isn't most people who play that game at all. Like it's like probably like 2% of the people who play that game. But I think there
Yeah.
are people who. Oh,
I was just going to say, I used to play an online MMO called Saga of Ryzom, and there was virtually no content in the game itself, like quest lines or anything. So if you didn't roleplay, there was nothing else to do. And that is the closest I've gotten to a proper role-playing experience in an MMO. Otherwise, even joining roleplay servers, it was disappointing. I'm glad you had that experience.
well, I'll be a little bit disappointing for you in a second because most of that experience for me was going to the clubbing scene in Final Fantasy XIV, which I did roleplay there, and I even had an erotic roleplay experience once. But I realized very early on in that experience, this is not doing anything for me, and so I very much was like, nope, I'm good, sorry. And but the clubbing scene was really cool, and like they had parties, like DJs, and they should have this thing in the game where you can play music. Like they'll have people with musical instruments, and they can get together in a group called an ensemble, and like literally play any song they wanted. So people will be playing like 80s and 90s and 2000s like rock music in the game
It's all
together.
starting to sound a bit Second Life to me.
Yeah, it was cool though. I really did enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But hey, are you familiar with multi-user dungeons?
Yeah. Back in the day, my college had one on its intranet, which we would mess around with. And back in the days of dial-up, I used to direct dial into a game called Avalon. So yeah.
Yeah, I recently had, well, so last, well, it might have been 2 years ago now. 2 years ago, or it might have been last year. I have no idea. But I played a multi-user dungeon for the first time with my friends because like I'm a bit of a weird dude. So I'm like, you know what? My friends are asking me to put together some events so we can plan some stuff out, taking into account some suggestions. Why don't we have a party where we play a multi-user dungeon? So we played this Star Wars Mud, and like none of us really like got into it at all, even remotely. But then I realized like a year later that there was a conference in real life in my city for these two specific multi-user dungeons, GemStone and DragonRealms. And they do
Hmm.
this every year. And so I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna go to this thing and see what it's like. And it was incredible, actually. Like I don't even care about the game really. But it was incredible because it's like these people who have been playing this game for 30 years, many of them, like 20, 30
Hmm.
years. And they've dedicated so much of their time to this and they it's one of them's more role play focused, the other one's more like action focused. But they've known each other online for like 30 years. They've been playing together. It's like this whole community of people who's like super tight knit, and they also like take their roleplay stuff like super well. The GemStone people do. The DragonRealms people don't. Mostly. No. Now, of course, the DragonRealms people are going to say, no, that's not true. It's the other way around. Because there's like a friendly rivalry between the two games. But it was like this really cool experience, like this. And you said that you haven't really had a chance to do like a role playing thing, but I could probably get you in touch with some of those people, and they at least from talking to them in real life, they seem to take the role play stuff very seriously. Now I don't know in the game because I've only played a little bit, but in the game I'm not sure if they take it as serious. But from what I hear, they do.
Yeah, it's more the MMOs where it's been a problem because there I was trying to roleplay and making decisions about my character progression and so on based on roleplay, and then nobody wants to team with you because you're not spec'd right for the dungeon. You haven't maximized your character in the right way. Yeah, so that tended to put the kibosh on things. We had a guild on the Lord of the Rings MMO where we had this big deep background, and we joined what was supposed to be a full-on role-playing server, and yeah, it just wasn't.
So representation. We talked
hmm
about this a little bit. You did. But do you think it doesn't matter?
For me, it certainly doesn't matter, and the evidence seems to be that in a lot of context, it doesn't really matter to anyone else. But there does seem to be this minority, or it seems to be what would be the right word? Seems to be a cause that some people want to sign on for, whether it has that much validity or not. I think if anyone was completely absent from our media, that would be a problem. But do we want media that's directly proportionate? Does that make sense or not? Do we want to overrepresent people? How are we going to choose? Are we going to choose people for talent or because they tick a certain amount of boxes? If someone with my issues appears in a show, I would want them to be on the show because they were talented, not because they shared my issues. If you see what I mean.
No, for sure.
I've identified with characteristics of female characters, black characters, Asian characters. It's never made a difference to me. How they look is probably the least important thing I can think of. It's tended to be their personality or their approach to things within the fiction that has interested me. And I don't just want to see the entire world through my own eyes. It's like with the role play, I want to experience it through the viewpoints of other people. But viewpoint is more cognitive and ideological rather than anything else. So it's more interesting to me to see and empathize with a character who is very different to me in a lot of ways. Sorry if I'm being too kind of pretentious and wordy. I'm
Hey,
feeling a bit
you can go
self-conscious.
wherever you want to go, and how deep you want to go, or how shallow you want to go. That's how I
That's
run
what she
these
said.
interviews. Oh damn! Fuck. That's in the book. You know that, right? That's gonna be in the book. And so is my erotic roleplay experience. So
Yeah, well, I think it's important to have a full record of everything.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, I can understand why it's more important to some people if they feel completely unrepresented, but I don't think we're in that place anymore. It's not the 1970s. The world's very, very different, and people have a lot of representation. It's I would argue things were better and more equal and less fraught in the 90s, honestly.
Now, I guess like the stereotypical example would be, the black kid who grows up in the ghetto and all he sees is a lot of black people joining gangs, and he thinks, well, this is the path for me, I guess. Whereas he looks and sees Obama, or he sees Dr. Ben Carson, or he sees someone else in a leadership role, or maybe even a movie, right? Maybe it's Stephen Franklin from Babylon 5 or whoever. And they're
Or,
like, you know
or
what?
Bill
Maybe
Cosby.
there's well, well, sure, Bill Cosby. And they're like, this is an alternate life path I could choose. And you know what? There are people like me who could be successful in this country.
Yeah, but okay, so that puts you on kind of the horns of a dilemma, doesn't it? Because if you present the professional upper middle class TV black character to that kid in the ghetto, he is not going to feel any kind of empathy or fellow feeling or common cause with that character. Yeah, it almost doesn't matter what color that character is. It's just as removed from his life experience as it would be if it was a white character. But yeah, equally, you don't want to just represent whoever as gang members. It's a bit at the risk of being pretentious again. It's a bit weird observing American culture from this side of the pond. Because here it's much more to do with class and wealth than it is to do with color for the most part. If anything, it's like Poles and Romanians who suffer more at the moment from discrimination, and they're white. They're just perceived as coming over here and taking people's jobs and all the usual bullshit. And you also see a lot of what Americans seem to regard as black stereotypes applied to poor white kids over here from council estates in Glasgow or wherever else. And I think personally that a lot of the racial analysis that goes on in the States is covering over what is really more of a class analysis that would be more applicable. I think it distracts people from that.
Hi, I'm Tachyon Blue. Thank you for watching another one of my GamerGate book video segments. Altogether, I've interviewed over 70 people involved with GamerGate, and I'm going to be launching a Kickstarter campaign in the coming weeks. So please, I need your support to help make this project a reality. I'm turning these 70 plus interviews into a multi-volume series of books, the first volume of which is already completed. And so I'd like you to please stay tuned for more information about the Kickstarter. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and comment. More updates will be coming in the near future. Thank you, and take care.